Welcome to Sports with Shook.
How about Nick Shook?
Nick Shook?
Nick Shook sounds like he's a middle backer.
Hold up, this is a new Sports with Shook. The show might be over, but the sports never stop. This is Sports with Shook Quick Hits.
What do you want to know about Nick Shook?
Nice job, Shook.
Here's your host.
Nick Shook's a beast. He's a big dude.
You know, he's handling this business.
That's impressive. That's very impressive.
Nick Shook.
Welcome into another edition of Sports with Shook. I'm Nick Shook, and I'm joined by Gabe Kramer, and I think it's been, close to a year since we've done this?
Close to too long, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Life gets in the way sometimes, as does sometimes you got to move yourself across the country again. So, but now Gabe's staying up late. It's 12:45 in the morning on the East Coast in Ohio, where Gabe is. And fortunately, and fortunately for me, it's not nearly as late where I am out in Los Angeles. But Gabe, you and I are going to tackle all things Cleveland Browns, who, I'm just going to say this right now, and I don't know if your optimist in you is going to disagree with me. Knowing you, I think you will, but I'm going to throw the gauntlet down now. I'm going to put it all out there on the line. You can call me a Debbie Downer, a pessimist, whatever you have to say. I think this team has a very real shot at going 0-16.
I don't disagree with you. They have a very good shot of going 0-16. I don't think it's going to happen just because I think it's hard to do. I think you go out there any given Sunday, you have a chance of winning a game. I think they're going to be able to pull out a win one of these days. They're going to find a team sleeping. These young guys might get motivated to pull out a victory once this year, twice this year. I think they'll end up with a win, a few wins at most. But to say that they could go 0-16 is not – it's not a statement that's super bold. I hate to say that.
See, I say this at work, and people scoff at me. They're like, well, first off, I get the – how could you say that about your team? And I'm like, guys, you don't understand. Like, I'm a journalist and a writer first and a fan second. And part of the reason I am that way is because growing up in our era with the Browns, for the most part, save for 2002, 2007, and I guess you could throw 2014 in there too, finishing 7-9. As aside from those seasons, this team has been, mediocre or worse. But you do make a good point. It is hard. It is very hard for a team to actually go 0-16. I mean, I got a text from our buddy Austin Moore, longtime member of Sports with Shook Cast, the other day, and he was dead serious. He said, my brother and I just had a very serious argument about whether this team or 1999's team was better. And I laughed because, honestly, when you look at this roster, this is a team that kept 13 of their 14 draft picks. He's got a good point. I mean, the 1999 team at least had some veterans that they got from the expansion draft. They had guys like Sean O'Hara, who went on to have a great career with the Giants after the Browns inexplicably let him go. They had, they had some veterans that maybe made a little bit of an impact. And I don't really know if you even have that presence on this team because they've gutted this roster, which for the right reasons. They need to gut that roster. They needed to cut Paul Kruger. They got a lot of value for Barkevius Mingo and even Justin Gilbert and Andy Lee. You know, 4th round pick for a punter. That's unbelievable. But this team might have less experience on it and be worse than the 1999 expansion team.
They look like an expansion team. How many rookies did you say they kept from the draft? They kept 13 out of the 14 drafted?
13 out of 14.
I'm looking at this. I look at the depth chart up and down, and I believe I counted 17 rookies on the roster. 17 out of 53 people?
I'm moving the roster to rookie right now.
It's unbelievable. So it's they look like an expansion team. I think that there was a bit of overkill with the gutting of this team. A lot of it makes sense. A lot of the moves make sense because with guys like Justin Gilbert and Barkevius Mingo, I hate to say it, but I kind of think that they're trimming the fat of this team, and they found a way to get some kind of value for them instead of just cutting them because fans here were crying, just get rid of these guys. Cut them. Let them loose. We don't need them. They're not providing anything to this team, so move on. And they found a way to get some value for them. There are other moves that you wonder and question, and you realize that by the time this team is successful, some of these players wouldn't really be around the league, but they can still provide some value to the team in the short term, even if it doesn't mean a huge impact on the field right now or in 3 years from now.
I think it's a mix between a blatant tank job and which they'll never admit to, but and also getting extremely young. They're the second youngest team in the league now. And it follows the whole analytics thing that everybody likes to talk about when it comes to this front office and their background in baseball and everything else. They don't sign guys 30 years or older. They go young. They don't spend a lot of money, that kind of thing. And you can see that in this roster. But, I bring up 1999 because of what Austin had texted me, but also because that 1999 team, for as bad as it was, still won 2 games. They won on a Hail Mary pass against the New Orleans Saints in the Superdome for their first win, and then they ended up beating the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Obviously, it was a much different Steelers team back then. It wasn't nearly as good, but they still managed to pull out 2 wins. So when I say going 0-16, and you talk about, that it's a difficult thing for them to do, when I say that it's possible, I honestly mean that because of just how inept they look and because of the latest news, which is that Robert Griffin III is going to miss extended time, might not see the field again this season, according to Ian Rappaport. And, we know what you have in Josh McCown. You know what you're going to get on the field. And if you surround him with some talent, he might be okay. But that's the problem with this team is there is very little talent on this team. So when you looked at RG3 making plays and getting out of the pocket because that line can't protect him, and there was a play against the Eagles last Sunday where he rolled out right, he pump faked, got the defender to bite, and ended up gaining 10 to 12 yards, got a first down. Those are the plays that he's going to make. Those are the plays that are going to keep your drives alive and put a little bit of excitement in. He can throw the ball deep. Sometimes it's just a jump ball like he did it prior. But these are the things that he brings to the table that Josh McCown also does not bring to the table. And you have to consider the fact that Josh McCown is in his mid to late 30s now. He's not a spring chicken, and he showed last year that he could, stroke. Actually, even when he was back in Tampa Bay, he had injury issues, hurting his thumb by slamming it against a teammate's helmet. And last year he broke a collarbone. So, and he had a concussion. This team, first from here, and the bad part is the schedule doesn't do them any favors.
Well, it's funny you say that about surrounding your quarterback with talent or any part on this team with trying to surround somebody with some kind of talent.
There's just not a lot.
There's not a lot of talent around this team. You do have some young guys that you're hoping to groom into something and try to develop. And of course, player development has probably been the worst aspect of the Browns since 1999. They just haven't been able to turn their draft picks into star players. You've had some diamonds rough here and there, but it's interesting to me that you talk about that because when I think of recent history Browns, and I'm talking 2011 till now, I'll give them 5 years simply because there are a lot of players on this roster who are similar or have been around parts of those years and have, you've seen their faces for a while. I think there have been seasons where we've had, let's say, 5 Pro Bowlers, 4 Pro Bowlers. You've had guys, not Mitchell Schwartz. You've had guys like Alex Mack, Joe Thomas, Jordan Cameron, Joe Hayden, Dante Whitner, Carlos Dansby, guys making Pro Bowls. And then, the next year it's a little different. Gary Barnidge, Alex Mack again, Joe Thomas. You're finding ways to have some talented players. So we've always had this mentality, and I hear this a lot still. The Browns are just a quarterback away. They're just a quarterback away from turning things around. I don't feel that way anymore.
They are much more than a quarterback away. I will tell you, they are much more.
Right. I felt this way 2-3 years ago, maybe even a little bit last year, feeling like, we get a quarterback on this team, things are really going to turn around simply because that person is going to start making plays. I don't feel that way. I get nervous about bringing in a young new quarterback and throwing them behind the offensive line that they have. I like the idea of having some of the wide receivers they have available to the quarterback, but still, what you're working with essentially is a rookie in Corey Coleman, a a rookie essentially in Terrell Pryor, a guy who's never played an entire season at wide receiver, didn't even play an entire season with the Browns last year. Yeah, they're looking fun to watch, but we don't know what we're going to get from them. We don't know that they're as good as we think they are. And of course, with Josh Gordon, you never know. I mean, he would really be the best out of all of them. And then you have 4 rookie wide receivers on this depth chart. 4. So you put a quarterback out there, I don't even know what's going to happen if they put a young guy out there.
I'm going to stop you there because here's the saddest part about this entire scenario. So for the last 4, 5, 6 years, I mean, let's see, it's 2016. When did the Browns draft Muhammad Massaquoi? Like 2011, something around there. Brian Hartline, those guys.
09.
The Browns, yeah, okay, 09. The Browns' their fan base, his biggest gripe when it came to the draft was, we didn't draft a receiver. The Browns didn't go get a receiver. Oh my God. They let this guy and Julio Jones and then this other guy and Odell Beckham and all these other guys slide right by him and went with different picks or traded out. And look, they still don't have that big time receiver. Well, their big time receiver has been suspended for the last year and a half. And that's irrelevant because right now, for the first time in a long time, and this isn't necessarily saying the best about them, receivers about the worst thing or the least thing I'm worried about with this team. I'm worried about the fact that beyond Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson, I mean, yeah, you don't really need 3 strong running backs, and those guys, do kind of offer some encouragement, but this offensive line isn't very good. I mean, I'm not going to take Isaiah Crowell and expect him to be a Pro Bowl caliber runner. I think Duke Johnson offers some things out of the backfield, but offensively, and especially when you get rid of RG3 and then you put a guy like Josh McCown back there. I mean, plain and simple, this team is not going to win games this year. And the quicker the fan base can get that through their head, the better for them. And also, I like how you mentioned, this team isn't really necessarily in a position to develop a younger quarterback. You're right, because, I mean, you looked at that game on Sunday, RG3 was running for his life half the time. They needed to design some rollouts based on play call just to get him away from some of that pressure. When you see a team roll out guys a lot, it's either because they're comfortable outside of the pocket or because that line, that guy long enough to make all the reads he needs to make and the throws that he needs to attempt. So boys, they rolled out Dak Prescott a lot, but that's kind of just to get him out in space, maybe make some plays with his legs and be able to see down the field clear than instead of make decisions in the pocket, especially if he was going to face a lot of blitzes from the Giants, considering that, if you're an opposing defense, you're going to want to blitz a rookie quarterback a lot. Who rolled out RG3 just to get him away from the hell that was coming inside the box. That Cameron Irving was atrocious. At one point blocked the wrong way on a zone stretch, which is pathetic because that's about the easiest blocking assignment you can have. You literally just work your way upfield and block the first guy that crosses your face. And that play resulted, it was completely blown up and looked awful. It's just they're like a sieve. So when you have, and I know this has been going on a lot back there just based off what I'm seeing on Twitter and the hot takes, flaming hot takes I'm seeing from the local beat writers about Carson Wentz the day after. How the Browns may have made a grave mistake in not selecting Carson Wentz and passing on him and trading the pick to the Eagles. If you put Carson Wentz behind that line, he gets destroyed. He doesn't look like he did on Sunday. And I'm not saying the Eagles have one of those great lines right now because they don't. But their line is significantly better than the Browns, and you could see it in the time that he had to throw. Oh, and not to mention the fact the Browns struggled to get to Wentz outside of Carl Nassib doing, making some inroads as well as Emmanuel Ogbah. I mean, for the most part, Wentz did have time to throw. Happen if he's in orange and brown. He gets destroyed a la Tim Couch, and you ruin another rookie quarterback, another young guy, just like they have for the last decade and a half, and the wheels on the bus go round and round, and the carousel keeps spinning. And it made me mad to see these hot takes coming out of the Cleveland area because they made a mistake. Wentz is the future. I can't believe you passed an elite quarterback. And I needed somebody to make this point, and Connor Orr from NFL.com made it today. And I told him, I was like, thank you for writing this, because he stated, they are not in a position to groom a young quarterback. He would get forced into action too soon. He would get killed. They don't have enough players around him. The Eagles have talent. The Browns, for the most part, don't. And it brings me back to the receiver point. The Browns might have they have more receiver talent than they've probably had in the last 6 years. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, we can agree on that. It's not outstanding, but it's better than it was yesterday. You know?
And you add Josh Gordon to the mix, it does make it better. But overall, as a unit, that's not enough. That's just they're not in the position to have a young quarterback. And the RG3 thing I think was the perfect mix between a bridge quarterback and potentially a long-term solution. And now that he's, down for a long time, it's very disappointing. But it's also very, very typical of the Browns. I expected at some point he would get hurt because he is a more brittle player. I mean, his injury history just speaks to that, unfortunately. But to go down with a fractured coracoid bone in your shoulder, which I didn't know what that bone was called until yesterday. So congrats, RG3, or more like the A to Z podcast says, congrats on informing me on a new bone in the human skeleton. I don't know. I don't even know if it really drives home a point other than that Northeast Ohio, I need to tell you this as someone who grew up there and doesn't live there right now, but still is very much in touch with you guys. Carson Wentz wasn't going to save you. And there are two vastly different scenarios. And the quicker you can learn that and understand that and accept that, the quicker you can accept the fact that this season is going to be a disaster and that you just need to, put your head down and get through it, because Cavs basketball starts in a month and a half or whatever. And there are bright spots in the city. Not to say that you need to turn the TV off. Keep watching the games, but it's not going to be fun. I just need to tell you that now, and you need to understand that now. And Carson Wentz wasn't going to change that.
Here's my thinking with Carson Wentz. Obviously, he's in a much different situation in Philadelphia. The offensive line's a little bit better. He has much better receivers around him. The running game is better. They're just a team with more experience. They're a team that is just superior to the Browns. But there are 31 teams in the NFL who you could probably say that about. So Carson Wentz, you put him in the orange and brown, he's going to struggle. You put him in week 1, he's especially going to struggle. You put him against that offensive line and put that kind of talent around him, he's not going to look the same. No doubt about it. My thinking is when you draft a quarterback, you have to make sure you go and get the guy that you think is going to end up being an elite quarterback, the guy who's going to take you to the promised land and, be a franchise guy, a guy who's going to be around a long time, and not just a guy who's going to be around for the sake of longevity, but he's going to be there and get you deep into the playoffs and really give you a shot at winning.
Well, yeah, and
so
let me just say before you continue, I want to say that Carson Wentz is that guy for Philadelphia. I think he's a heck of a player, and he's going to be a heck of a player. And before the draft, I was all on board the Carson Wentz train, not to Cleveland, but just to wherever he ended up, because if you watched him in the Senior Bowl practices, you could just tell he had it. And when Los Angeles decided to go with Jared Goff number 1, I was like, man, that's a mistake. And it's easy to say that now because he's third string in Los Angeles and, whatever. And Wentz looked good in week 1. But, I mean, seriously speaking, Wentz has the physical tools to be a fantastic quarterback in this league for a long time. He needs to work on avoiding getting hit so much when it comes to the way he takes sacks is weird. He jumps up in the air, and that kind of leaves you more susceptible to some gross injuries than just kind of, covering yourself up and taking the sack. But I want to interrupt you there just because I think that is the guy. I think he is one of those guys. But he wouldn't have been one of those guys in the circumstances in Cleveland. You could say the same thing about Tim Couch. If you would have put him on a different quarter or on a different team back in the late 99 or whatever, he might have been different. If you would have put him in Philadelphia, he might have been a totally different story. You can't say that necessarily because you never know what if. But I do want to say that Wentz is that guy for the Eagles because it's a good fit for him, even this early.
So if Carson Wentz is that type of player, and obviously he's going to have a better shot of getting that way with the Eagles right now, I think the thinking for Browns fans and, for a lot of people thinking, man, they should have taken this guy. I don't think they're completely wrong in thinking, yeah, we wish we had this guy just because. Well, look, you have as a coach for the coaching here. No, hold on. The coaching staff needs to be smart about how they develop their players. I mean, they have to know, okay, we like Carson Wentz, we like what he has, but we have to know that we can't throw him into the situation. We have to keep him. We have to Aaron Rodgers him. We have to keep him on our bench for 16 games, 32 games maybe, and see what we can do to protect this guy, see what we can do to give him some targets and a running game and a defense that will, keep him on the field as much as he can. It's, the timetable for the Eagles and Browns for being a superior team in the league is different. The Eagles are more accelerated because of how good their team is relative to the Browns. So the Browns, I think if you think you have that guy, you got to go find them because they're hard to come by. It's just a matter of how you do it. So I think Browns fans, yes, are upset that they pass on a guy who, like you said, and believe like you that he's that type of quarterback. I don't think the expectation is that we should have not only had this guy but put him in week 1 to play against the Eagles, because the story would have been different. The story probably would not have been different if we put Carson Wentz in there week 1 to play against Sam Bradford or whoever it is they would have had in those shoes. So I think there's room to be disappointed that the Browns didn't go after Carson Wentz with the number 2 pick.
I think part of that, though, in that analysis, and you did, make it all relative to where the Browns are now, and you explained that well. But I think that statement largely comes in a vacuum. You can't. The circumstances are so different that you cannot take a guy like Wentz and go from putting him in Philadelphia and seeing what he did to putting him in Cleveland. And I think you could say that the Browns should do something like bench him for all 16 games and Aaron Rodgers him. But here's the fact about Aaron Rodgers that a lot of people overlook. Packers had Brett Favre. They didn't need another quarterback. They didn't need to rush a guy. They let Rodgers sit on the bench because there was no pressure. There was no, hey, put the young guy in. They had a freaking legend on the field. They didn't need that. They did it exactly how they were supposed to, even though it got a little ugly at the end. That's not the case in Cleveland, and we know that. As soon as you get a young guy, what are the fans clamoring for? Put him in. Look at what happened. Johnny Manziel, Brady Quinn. Brady Quinn might have single-handedly upended Derek Anderson's peak of his professional career. I mean, always hearing about the guy on the bench when you're balling out, and yet you still have to hear about Brady Quinn the next offseason. I mean, that's got to wreck a guy mentally. Some guys are stronger than others, but I know from living there and from growing up and all of that, and you do too. You know this, that they wouldn't let Carson Wentz sit on the bench. He wouldn't have made it past week 6 because the Browns would have started 0-6, and they'd have been like, you know what, screw it, we're putting Carson Wentz in because why the hell not? We suck anyway, right? Well, I mean, we've seen it happen before.
Or once, management, coaching staff, ownership needs to be strong and not do what the fans want all the time. I mean,
I don't see that happening.
It's embarrassing that they're caving into, the demand of the fans. I mean, I know it sucks to admit, but that's what it's going to take. I mean, if this team really wants to turn around, they have to be strong because the Browns have to do something different. They're awful. They are so bad. And, let's just say, for instance, you build this team in 2 or 3 years and you have an offensive line that, is one of the best in the league, and you've got some good targets out there. The defense is playing pretty well, and you feel like you're back to a point where we're a quarterback away. Let's go get that quarterback. What if there's no quarterback there? The quarterbacks that are, tier 1 quarterbacks are so hard to come by. And if you really think Carson Wentz is that guy, I think you have to go after it. I think you have to take him. Now, I don't think the Browns saw him as that guy. I'm not sure if the Browns still see him as that guy. Now, let's keep in mind, Carson Wentz was playing against the Cleveland Browns, and, he got a chance to be at home and, all these things and all those things. Carson Wentz was in a good situation for week 1, and time will still tell.
Yeah, it was like a perfect storm.
But, if he is that guy and you analyze him as that guy to be a tier 1 quarterback, the type of guy to take you to the promised land, I mean, as a staff and as Hugh Jackson, you got to think to yourself, look, I'm doing things my way or the highway. I'm not doing what Pumpkinhead wants. I'm not doing what Nick Shook and Gabe want. I'm going to do things the way things need to get done. And I'm going to take this quarterback. I'm going to groom him, and I'm going to try to build my team around him and put him in when he's ready. I mean, that's how quarterbacks were developed before. I mean, shoot, what was the turning point, I feel like, was a guy like Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco, who they gave all this money to and they threw him in there. But before that, it was very common to see guys sit the bench for a while before, as a rookie, before getting in there. So, and it's because your team is bad. It's because you also don't have good protection, and you also, you're going to put your quarterback in there in a bad situation. So that's what I think. I mean, I mean, what do you think? In 2 or 3 years, you have your offensive line, you got a quarterback, and now you have a draft that looks like 2013, where the first guy off the board is EJ Manuel, and the best guy out of it is Landry Jones. I mean, you're gonna have slim pickings, and then who, because you never know what you're gonna get. That tier 1 quarterback is so hard to find. If you find one, grab on and hold on for dear life. I mean, for 17 years, the Browns have trying to find that guy and have not even come close. Haven't even been able to find a tier 2, 3 quarterback.
You know what happens when you there's no tier 1 quarterback in the draft. That's how you end up with Sam Bradford, who is disguised. He's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's like he's disguised as a tier 1 quarterback, but really he's a tweener between a 2 and a 3.
Brady Quinn.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I need to access tape from Brady Quinn's tenure and really break it down, because
NFL
I don't know if NFL
Okay.
Browns. I know what he looked like with the Chiefs, which was atrocious. But with the Browns, it's like he brought some type of. I mean, it wasn't like he was bad when he played at first, but then again, I don't know if I went on like a 2-year bender or something and just can't remember that at all or what. But I have a hard time recalling what exactly tanked Brady Quinn's career with the Browns. Let's just say it was a very emotional time, and I kind of shoved that deep down into places that I struggle to reach. Maybe it'll come back to me at some therapy session or something if I'm ever in therapy or at a shrink or in a straitjacket. Anyways, this scenario that you said, and with a team that maybe has an offensive line, I just want to point out real quick, rave reviews out of Kansas City this week after the debut of right tackle Mitchell Schwartz, who supposedly, per one beat writer, said that the Chiefs got a steal. Let me remind you that Mitchell Schwartz wanted to stay in Cleveland. I'm not a Mitchell Schwartz fan, never have been, thought he was overrated, but he wanted to stay in Cleveland. And the Browns pulled the offer off the table and kind of forced his hand to move to KCMO, home of the Chiefs, Arrowhead Stadium, where they completed an incredible comeback this week over the San Diego Chargers. So you watch former Browns elated with joy. On one sideline, you have Travis Benjamin going back to the locker room, dreads hanging over his face, head down. He's very despondent. On the other sideline, you have former Brown Mitchell Schwartz cheering as his team comes back and wins, both more relevant than the current Browns squad, which has very little to brag about when it comes to the offensive line, which I hate to continue to harp on because there's also a very bad secondary to talk about. But you know that this game is won and lost in the trenches. And if you don't have a good offensive line, which the Browns had a year ago, I mean, they had the makings of a good offensive line. I'm not even going to talk about Alex Mack because he goes against their whole analytics thing. And, even if I was in Saji Brown's place, probably wouldn't give him the money that Atlanta gave him. Not at 30 years old. That's just not the way I would do things either. Especially in trying to stay young. But God, it's frustrating to just see how bad that line is for them. Not in a fan sense, but just in a guy who really enjoys excellent offensive line play. It's so far from it that it's nauseating to the point where it's like, how are these guys professionals? I keep going back to Irving, but how's Cameron Irving starting at center? I mean, he's not having an easy time with the switch. And Hugh Jackson even admitted it this week that, he's got work to do and he'll get it eventually. But it's like, one of the reporters tried to make an excuse for him that because he's tall, he's having a hard time with it. And then Jackson shoots that down and goes, I had a guy named Jared Veld here who was 6'8", played center for me one year. That's not the issue. He's just got to put in more work. This whole team, I feel like, needs to put in more work. But the thing is, and I need the fan base to do this, and I need really the front office to do this. The front office needs to put the blinders on. They need to turn the media outlets off. They need to let the beat writers who are bitter beyond belief, who love to talk about the hashtag 100 Years War and just beat the crap out of them and make them. They try to make this front office atone for the past regime's sins. And this front office needs to put the blinders on. They need to not listen to what they are going to hear. They need to, put on some shields and, let those badgering questions kind of bounce off of them. Let's get some Teflon vests for Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta. Is that good? Because they need to stick the course. They need 3 years. Solid 3 years to see any real turnaround. It's going to be a tough season this year. It's going to be just as tough next year, maybe a little bit better. And in a very roundabout way, I'm coming to my point now that do you think that it's early. I don't know who's going to declare. We have a whole college football season to watch. But do you think that guy's in this draft? Because I know you love the draft, Gabe.
Oh, I love the draft, and I hate admitting that. I mean, I don't hate admitting. I kind of.
Gabe, I'm getting tweets.
Of course, I've looked at mock drafts. Of course,
Gabe, I'm legitimately getting tweets from people asking about who the Browns are going to pick.
So obviously, I mean, do I know if that guy's there? I think when you obviously the guys people are talking about are Deshaun Watson, Deshaun Kaiser, Chad Kelly. Yeah, those names are there, but those names could be completely different next April. Things could be completely different in October. So it's early to find out if that quarterback is there. I mean, in 2013 draft, you know who that top name was? It was Matt Barkley, and he was considered a first rounder.
Oh my God!
What's Matt Barkley doing? You know, I mean, it's so early to figure out if that guy is there, which is why I'm pushing this agenda to say, like, if you feel that elite quarterback is there, you take him no matter what. And I haven't, spoken my mind about what I think about Carson Wentz or how the Browns handle their draft situation. But what I think is, if you're a person who thinks that there, then you should also be a person that wants it. So coming up in this draft, I have no idea. What I do want to say about this team that, you said, you talk about how bad the offensive line is and how, things were so bad and you're not sure they're going to be better next year. And when I throw into the mix about, we used to be what we thought was a quarterback away. It's hard to even get excited about aspects of this team. I last year we at least had something to bite into to think like, I wonder how the backfield is going to do with, Duke Johnson, a new creative playmaker along with Isaiah Crowell, for as crazy as that sounds. We wondered if the defensive line would get any better with Danny Shelton to play alongside, Paul Kruger coming off the edge. I mean, now maybe we have, the young pass rush front seven that we think, let's look for them to give us something to bite into this game despite a loss. I used to look for the cornerbacks last year of, I used to get excited at the idea like, oh man, let's look at Joe Hayden and see who's going to be his partner because we've got options. We can choose between Justin Gilbert. Maybe we'll see K'Wan Williams end up being a real cornerback and not just a nickel, and maybe Pierre Desir will make that jump we expected him to make, or maybe the guy from Oregon, what was it, Ifo Ekbrialamu will get healthy and he can be the guy. We had all these names who, when they first came out, we thought, these are kind of fun. But now it's like, oh, you have Jamar Taylor over there and Joe Hayden, and Joe Hayden's not looking nearly as good as he was. I'm starting to wonder if the secondary is the worst part of this defense. So
it definitely is.
Most frustrating part of this team is just like there's nothing to get excited about, and we're so much farther away. I mean, I don't know how you feel about some of the cuts and some of the players that the Browns have gotten rid of. I get it. For the most part, but I think there were some that you probably could have used in some kind of sense. Like I don't know how much of a believer NFL coaches are in veterans in the locker room for the sake of trying to help using them and their knowledge and their experience to help groom the young guys, but you're not getting that here. You're not getting that with this squad because those guys are gone. Those guys are long gone. Even Joe Hayden could use some veteran presence to help him.
I had a two separate conversations in the preseason about this with noted Browns aficionado and NFL writer Mark Sessler, who, if he's very much like you and I are when it comes to being an encyclopedia of the Browns and everything Browns, despite not being from Northeast Ohio or having really any geographic relation to the Browns other than the fact that he latched onto them when they were good in the 80s, which good for him. I'm glad he got to see that because we didn't. But the first conversation was about the defense and how the front seven had some potential. They might be able to stop some people, but man, they're going to get torched in the passing game. And that was before the Browns had let go of Gilbert, who we all know was atrocious. getting caught with your eyes in the backfield is one thing. The way Justin Gilbert played the cornerback position as Cleveland Brown was way worse than that. It's disappointing because he has the physical tools. And after getting traded to Pittsburgh, they kind of made the low risk bet on, all right, well, let's send a 6th rounder, because how often do we ever hit on 6 rounders for a guy who is very talented athletically and just needs to get his head on straight and actually play with the correct technique, the correct discipline, and with the right attitude, because he was a head case for the entire time he was in Cleveland, and coaches couldn't wrangle him in. But so he's gone. And even then, it still looked better than it does now. I mean, K'Wan Williams 2 years ago was a fantastic nickel corner. It was a surprise and kind of a knock on Gilbert that Williams beat Gilbert out for the nickelback position. And then we kind of figured out why, because Williams played the position with intensity, with great discipline, flew around on the field, and made a lot of great plays that you wouldn't expect of an undrafted guy. And then this season, he kind of clashed with the staff, had some bone spur issues, got into a spat with the staff about playing time against Green Bay, said that they, according to reports, he was offered a full-time position in that Green Bay game and a chance to compete for the job, and he turned it down. I think it had something to do with his health. It was revealed that he did have bone spurs in his ankles. He was suspended because he didn't want to play, which was weird. It was just, the whole thing was weird. And as soon as I found out about the suspension, I was like, oh no, he's not going to be here for very long. And what do you know? 2 weeks later, he's cut, and you're that much thinner in the defensive backfield. And then they trade Justin Gilbert, and whether or not he was horrible, which I just covered, he was still a warm body and an athletic talent that is no longer there. So now you're left with Joe Hayden, who you mentioned, might be declining, or just the effects of being hurt for the last few years are really starting to show. There's something about him that's just, he got burnt a few times against Philadelphia, which, secondaries play in tandem. So sometimes it's not always the guy's fault. The guy might be running after the ball carrier in vain, and you're like, wow, look at him, he got beat. But it's not always his fault.
I have a theory on that, by the way, when you're ready for it.
Okay, you can hit me with it in a second. And then on the other side, you have 33-year-old, I believe. Yes, Tramon Williams, 33 years old. He's a 10-year veteran, signed a nice contract under, and I'm going to go on a tangent real quick about this, under the Ray Farmer regime. And the reason you can blame the Browns' ineptitude right now and Ray Farmer in 2 different areas. One area are his completely missed draft picks, whether it was Barkevius Mingo in that thin draft that you talked about, the 2013 draft. And then also missing on 2 first-round picks with Manziel and with Gilbert in 2014, when there was that talent. That draft was loaded. Missed out on all kinds of talent. We can, go back and rehash all of that. We're not going to. But so he missed in the draft in multiple areas. But he also missed in free agency, because the signings that he made, he replaced younger guys with talent with older versions of themselves who might not have been as good. Point in case, TJ Ward lets him walk, replaces him with Dante Whitner. What do the Browns do now? They cut Dante Whitner. Guess who doesn't have a job? Dante Whitner. Guess who's a Super Bowl champion in Denver? TJ Ward. Those kind of moves. Tramon Williams, signed Tramon Williams as a corner. Another move where you're like, okay, so you got this veteran who, he might be nearing where it's basically exactly the opposite of this analytics take now. That he's getting near 30. He might be, on the back end of his career. Let's give him a 3 or 4 year deal and let the younger guy walk. That's what Farmer did over and over and over again with this team. So when you saw this great purge of veterans, it was like they were getting, they were trying to clean up all those mistakes, but in the process, you have to replace them with bodies. Not even great guys, just bodies. So now we have all these young guys in the secondary. You have Derek Kindred, undrafted rookie. You have Jordan Poyer, who's been with the Browns for 4 years, but he's a special teamer, and now he's been thrust into a full-time role in the secondary. Jamar Taylor, who the Browns went and traded for from the Dolphins, who was probably going to get cut by the Dolphins, even though their secondary is pretty bad. And Don Jones, who the hell is Don Jones? You have guys like Tracy Howard, Ibrahim Campbell, who's the only defensive back left over from the whole Ibrahim Campbell, and there's one more safety in that trio. This is why the secondary is so bad, and it's it's frustrating to watch again, but this is one of those scenarios where you look at this roster and going in, these guys are going to struggle. So I had that conversation with Sessler about that secondary. And then I also had a conversation with him about those veterans. You talked about maybe, I don't know if you agreed or disagree with cutting some of those guys. We looked at two guys in particular, and I said, Mingo's probably on the block, because this is his last year. We've heard the whole, he's bulked up and he's playing well and everything else, but we all know that the guy still can't, get down a pursuit angle. I've seen Pee Wee players with better pursuit angles than Barkevius Mingo. And, he's just wildly underperformed for his draft position, even though that draft was atrocious in general. For all teams, almost all teams, he was really bad as well. So we knew that he was probably going to be on the chopping block unless he had a great camp. And he didn't. And he got traded, which was better than the chopping block because he was going to get cut. And, everybody's up in arms. How could you trade him away for a late round pick like that? You weren't going to get anything for him. So be glad you got a pick for him. Good move on the front office's part. The other guy was Paul Kruger. And I said, I could see him being on the chopping block because he makes a lot of money and they're not in cap issue. They're not in salary cap hell or anything. But why pay a guy when you're going to be bad? To be a veteran defensive end. And he said, well, he's a great locker room presence, which you brought up, the locker room presence. And I said, okay, I could see that. I could see him sticking around because of that, but not necessarily because of how well he's playing. He had a decent preseason, but I didn't have an issue with that release either. The only problem I've had with this front office is they haven't done this with grace. They let Dante Whitner go way after free agency when he probably could have gotten a job somewhere, maybe, and now he can't. They let Kruger go way late, which luckily he latched on with the Saints, who had gone after him when he was a free agent coming out of Baltimore. But that's my only gripe with it, because in the long run, I would rather see a guy like a Carl Nassib or an Emmanuel Ogba or a Joe Schobert or even a Nate Orchard get some time at outside linebacker, and especially in pass rushing scenarios where they can get some experience because they're all young. I mean, the oldest, I'm looking at the linebackers right now, the oldest linebackers on this roster are 27 years old, and that's Demario Davis and Tank Carter. Tank Carter's been a special teams dynamo for the Browns since he's come out of TCU. Demario Davis is a fresh free agent signing. He's on a 2-year deal. So they're not tying themselves down at the linebacker position, and so I was okay with them getting rid of Kruger. But now, after I've gone on my very long tangent about all of this, go ahead.
Well, no, it's funny about, if I run through these players they've gotten rid of, when I think of this in my head about, Kruger, K'Wan Williams, Justin Gilbert, Barkevius Mingo, Whitner, Dansby, in my mind,
I forgot about Dansby.
It's funny. You think of them as far as in terms of how do they benefit the team. My basic mindset is that the Browns were terrible. The Browns were really bad. Any move they make is, I can't really complain about, because the Browns are hey, they're terrible. They're getting rid of players on a terrible team. So at some point it's justified. I think part of the conversation around the Browns for the last couple of weeks, at least, has been, is this team tanking? And I look at those moves to think, well, is it justified in a sense of, if the Browns want to defend themselves, whether or not they've been tanking, are these moves justified? So that's kind of the mindset I've been looking at them, because ultimately any player they get rid of, with the exception of maybe one guy, any player they get rid of is, fine. This team's terrible. That kind of has to be the mindset moving forward, that anybody could do better because everyone has been doing better. So, Dansby getting up there in age, fine. Whitner getting up there in age, fine. Helps them justify that, reasoning that, hey, we're not tanking, we're just doing what's best for this roster. And, they essentially replaced Dansby with a younger Demario Davis, less experience, but he's somewhat of a veteran at this point. Whitner was handled improperly, that's for sure. But he's a guy that I wish they would have kept around for that veteran presence. I would have liked a situation where you get rid of Dansby to keep Whitner. But ultimately, hey, I get it. That's fine. Kruger, I think, was also mishandled. I think it was probably handled poorly just because if he's a guy who's on the fringe of getting cut, you don't really give any indication of this guy. I mean, you play him with the first team in the preseason, you give him rest at the end of the game. It looks like he's safe. It looks like he's got that roster spot. According to him, you would think that if you were him.
Well,
so,
I mean, I saw some guys who were on the bubble who got more playing time in like the fourth game of the preseason who made the team like in different cities. Like Austin Safarian-Jenkins played all 4 quarters of the fourth week of the preseason in a torrential downpour in Tampa Bay. And he was third on the depth chart at tight end, still made the team, caught a touchdown in week 1. I mean, so that's like the flip side of what you're talking about. I think you're right. And I think that I'm really glad for Kruger's sake because, it's a business. You understand both sides of it, but, sometimes you got to feel for these guys. And I was really glad that Kruger came out and said that it was a total mistake and completely poorly handled and everything else on the part of the Browns because he's right. I mean, he's absolutely right. And I'm glad that he latched on with another team and got another job.
I mean, he wasn't that. I mean, he wasn't such a terrible player. I mean, he only had 2 sacks last year, but he had 11 the year before. Some team can find a way to develop him back into something that's worthwhile. So I wasn't thinking he'd have a hard time finding a team. But at the same time, the Browns could, even though it was handled poorly, I think the Browns could justify cutting them from their roster just because, hey, we want to see what the young guys can do. They're giving us just as much value on the field as he is or would have, and it's going to cost us less money, and he's not going to be around for the next 3 or 4 years on this team when, at least, when we want him. We want players in their prime in 3 or 4 years, not guys past their prime. Justin Gilbert, Barkevius Mingo, as far as I'm concerned, they've been so useless for the team that those were good moves, and getting rid of Andy Lee to get a 4th-round pick is just kind of a cool bargain. I mean, the Browns, obviously, punters are kind of undervalued. Field position is so important, but let's be honest for a second. I mean, come on, we're getting a 4th-round pick for a punter, and the Panthers are a team that went to the Super Bowl, so the Panthers are a team that can kind of spend a little more on a punter because they could be a punter away from winning the Super Bowl. The Browns aren't a punter away. The Browns aren't 100 punters away. The Browns are 53 players away from being a Super Bowl team, essentially. So, that's fine. So I think the Browns can justify all these moves without it just, them saying, hey, we're, for fans or analysts to accuse them of this team is tanking. Look at all these moves they're making. Like, that's how I think of it in terms of those moves, because ultimately any move you make or any player you get rid of, with the exception of maybe one, I think, all right, fine, this team's terrible, do what you need to do.
Well, I mean, they have 2 first-round picks, so it makes sense why they would just say, all right, the season's a wash. We got to gut the roster. We got to use, we got to get the number 1 pick. And so that we have control over whoever we want. And then we also have another pick to, use later. I don't like the speculation that they're going to package all these picks to move up, because I don't think they're going to have to move up, because I think they're going to be right at the top of the draft.
Yeah, they're going to get the negative first pick in the draft.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Browns are in a great position to package them to go get Deshaun Watson. It's like, are you guys delirious?
They're going to just use it. They're just going to take it.
First off, this team's not a quarterback away yet, and secondly, they're not going to need to. They're going to have the first pick. And I also want to emphasize that I'm not, being a pessimist when it comes to all of this. I would love to see them win, being from the area and everything else, and growing up going to Browns games and all that. But you got to be real. I mean, you got to be realistic with the whole scenario. And so it's going to be a tough one. So let me ask you this before I step to what I want to do next. I want to ask you, since we know this is going to be a bad season, do we try to plan on doing this every week and breaking down this game, knowing that this team is just not good? I mean, because there's still a function to this season. You saw it in week 1. I like to talk about NASA because he looked awesome in the preseason, and he was the 3rd-round pick. I think he's going to be a steal. And I liked him coming out of Penn State. I love his story, how he didn't even start in high school, how he's a blue-collar guy. He's the kind of guy that you associate with a Midwestern city like Cleveland. And I think that he's got a chance to succeed. So there are some players who are worth watching. I do like that Derek Kindred player as well, undrafted safety, comes in week 1 and is flying around, throwing his body around. At one point, he cut Jordan Matthews at the legs to avoid getting blocked and kind of blow up an outside run, which worked. And so there are some guys that we could talk about that are encouraging. But do we break it down every week, or do we just try to find some silver linings in what are otherwise going to be some ugly games?
Man, we're literally going to be saying the same thing every week. Yeah, the Browns are bad. They're not a quarterback away. This is bad. That's bad. And we're just going to get inch closer and closer and closer to this is what they should be doing in the draft. This should be the plan of attack.
So there's a function to it.
But but I think the real function to this season is player development, and that's deeper than just let's hope these rookies turn into pretty good veterans. I mean, it goes way deeper than that, and this kind of ties into that theory I was talking about with Joe Hayden. Why is he not the player he used to be? And I have to give this coaching staff the benefit of the doubt because they just got here.
Absolutely,
they've been here since January. I think of the previous staffs, and maybe they didn't get enough time to show themselves, but man, oh man, we look at players come and go and there's no development. I mean, I start to wonder, are the Browns really that bad at drafting? Are they really missing this many times, or are they just not developing their players properly and helping them come along to become something? Because there's so many different ways you can think of player development. I mean, let's look back at the drafts kind of recently. Trent Richardson, Justin Gilbert, Cameron Irving, and those are first round talent. These are players that teams wanted, not just the Browns. A lot of teams wanted these players. I have a feeling that they go to other teams and maybe they get developed quicker. Maybe they end up playing better. Cameron Irving on another team, maybe he's a Pro Bowler by now. Justin Gilbert on another team, maybe he's at least starting. I just wonder if these coaches don't make the proper efforts to turn these college athletes into pros. And I look at it from not just a young draft pick, but also a guy like Paul Kruger. I mean, he didn't play as well in Cleveland as he did in Baltimore. Desmond Bryant hasn't been playing as well in Cleveland as he did in Oakland. I think even though you're a veteran, you still need to be coached up. You still need this care and attention that even a rookie would get. You still need that. I mean, I think there's very few players in the league who really reach this level of I'm good on my own. I don't need groomed anymore. Guys like TJ Ward, a little bit Jabal Sheard, when they leave the Browns, they get so much better. I mean, at least it appears that way. I mean, TJ Ward, seems like one of the best safeties in the league. And I think he may have been fringe one of the best safeties in the league with the Browns, but he looks like he's on another level with the Broncos. So, this idea of player development, it's part of why I think Joe Hayden's not playing as well. I don't think coaches are really grooming him and giving that time and attention to, work him to be one of the best cornerbacks in the league instead of leaving it up to himself. Like, hey, I'm not on this coaching staff. I can't speak for them. And, I'm not there every day to really nitpick and give notes to what kind of attention they're getting. But it's clear that the Browns don't develop talent the way they probably should be.
Here's the thing. Here, I'm going to give you 2 points first. Let's put you in a middle school classroom. And let's say your math teacher leaves after the first quarter of the year. And a new math teacher comes in and has a completely different teaching style and is trying to tackle the same subjects but in a different way. It's going to take a while for you to adjust. You're going to have to get used to it. You're going to have to get into the rhythm. That teacher leaves after the second quarter. You're now in semester 2 and you're on your third teacher. That teacher wants to cover completely new material and also has a different style. Have fun adjusting to that and also being able to rely on what you've already learned. I think that can be applied to being if you have a different offensive coordinator every year, if you have a different defensive coordinator every year, it's going to get really hard because in life, in any situation, familiarity and comfort breeds success. And if you don't have familiarity, if you're not comfortable in where you are, and you're constantly having to adjust on the fly, it's going to limit your development and your improvement as a person, no matter what you're doing. If you're using a different piece of, to kind of expand that analogy, say you're on a construction crew and one day you're using a jackhammer, and the next day you're like road grading, new asphalt. And then the next day you're operating a crane. I mean, if you're not familiar with any of it, you're going to struggle. I mean, it's like that in life. So I think you have a very good point there, and I think that's very true. So that does hold guys back in player development. I also think that.
I think no, but I think you're being completely fair by, essentially the word is continuity. I mean, we've said this multiple times, and it's look, your offensive coordinator changes, your head coaches change, your playbook changes, on a regular basis. You can't get used to that. So no, I think you're absolutely right in a sense of, hey, and that's where I think the conversation is this year. The Browns have a new system in place. Jimmy Haslam has made these almost promises that these guys are here to stay, and we can really watch this coaching staff grow with the roster. So that's what we have to look out for week to week is the player development. And now with the belief and the trust that they really have a shot at that. So, can we see Carl Nassib go from, a third round pick to a starter to a star? And can we see Joe Hayden come from, Pro Bowl shutdown corner status, falling off, he's injured, he looks like a dud. Can we see him get back to the ways that he used to be? Can Cameron Irving find a way to, get his technique down and, keep the snaps lower and also find his block and learn the playbook? So, I think those are the things you have to look out for. I think fans really, 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 really want to see a quarterback develop. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year. Maybe Cody Kessler can have a good time holding the clipboard and see how he, learns things during practice, but you're not going to see a quarterback develop this year. But let's try to see if the other things can come with it. You didn't see any of it in week one. There was nothing to get excited about. Maybe Carl Nassib, but Carl Nassib had a good game, but the defensive line did not. So, I think that's what you have to look out for.
I think Emmanuel Ogbah also had a decent outing, but that's kind of beside the point. I think that effect has a trickle down on some of the players of the past too that you could look at. I mean, could Barkevius Mingo become like a specialist rusher and flourish in New England? I could see that happening without a doubt. Could Justin Gilbert turn it around in Pittsburgh under the right tutelage and the right motivation of a guy like Mike Tomlin, who has plenty of experience with defensive backs? Absolutely. I could see both of these things happening. Yeah. But you know what? That's what happens when you don't have that continuity. So you make a very good point. When it comes to this week, I want your prediction regardless, because Baltimore's defense looked really good in week one. That was the game I was assigned to watch, and they bottled up Tyrod Taylor. Buffalo couldn't do jack on offense. I think that this could be disastrous, but I want to hear your pick before we go.
You want to hear my pick if you think I think the Browns are going to win this?
Well, no. I know you're not going to pick the Browns, but I just want to hear your general prediction.
I think the Ravens are a team that can be pretty good. I mean, I have an uncle who is a Ravens fan, and he's last year he was like, oh man, because the Browns beat the Ravens in one of those games, and the other game was a close
Gary
one.
Barnidge, the thigh catch for Gary Barnidge, yeah, that
right.
one.
So they played the Ravens tough last year, and my uncle's telling me, man, the Ravens might be just as bad as the Browns, and I'm thinking to myself, okay,
not even close.
What the Ravens have, they had an off year for sure. But the one thing that they have is a quarterback that they know they can go in with, and if they find a way to protect him and give him some targets and work that defense a little bit, which is easier to do than finding a quarterback, believe it or not. It's so any given year you walk into that situation where who your quarterback is, he's pretty good, that he's won a Super Bowl, then yeah, the team can turn around, at any point in time. So that's one reason, but also the Ravens already have this established it's in the air. And I want to say tradition, but tradition is a little weird because coaches change, coordinators change, players change, but there's that feeling in the air that the Ravens win games. The Ravens don't lose for very long. So that's my feeling toward the Ravens. But, it's true that their roster was a little off last year. I think bringing Steve Smith back for this year is good for that roster because, otherwise who would have been their number one guy? Rashad Perriman? Or, who would have been, a reliable hand? So I do think that the defense has gotten better, but it's the offense that I wonder about. The running game. You never really know who that's going to be. Justin Forsett was cut and then re-signed, and just his whole weird thing. But I don't expect Justin Forsett to be as good as he was, but and I don't expect this offense to be outstanding. So I think when the Browns play the Ravens, they're going to have a chance. But when I say have a chance, it's a chance in a sense of one of those games that they might catch a team sleeping, or they might, play a little bit out of their mind. If they beat the Ravens this year, it won't be this Sunday. That's my prediction. So, I keep going back to this. 0-16 is kind of hard to do, and sometimes maybe harder to do than 1-15 or 2-14. So I think the Browns are going to get at least one win this year. I don't know who it's going to be against, because when you play the schedule game, it's 0-16 for sure. But there's going to be an inaccuracy somewhere, just for the sake of that's the way life goes. But I don't think life's going to go that way this Sunday. So
yeah,
it's going to be. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a close one either. Like, I think the Browns have a chance of getting a win, but it'll be later in the year when they start to figure things out a little bit.
We're going for 1-15, and number one is not coming Sunday. I'd like to make my prediction on what game it's going to be. we might be at 0-14 when the Browns finally get a win. I think that it comes on Christmas Eve against the Chargers, who traditionally hate coming to Cleveland in December and always get scheduled in Cleveland in November, December, and play.
That's a good thought.
Like crap in the miserable conditions that are always there. And you're right, at the end of the year they could get it together. But I'll tell you what, buckle up, because it's going to be tough. 0-2 after this Sunday, but we'll be back next week to break it down again and talk about the rookies who might have, or the young guys who might have impressed us a little bit, because maybe we should change this to Silver Linings with Shook, because it's going to be a rough year.
I like that thought. Silver Linings with Shook.
For Gabe Kramer, I'm Nick Shook. Thanks for listening to Sports and Silver Linings with Shook. Until next week, see ya.